tutoring session went a little bit late. Welcome everybody to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're so thrilled to be here. A little late today because I had a tutoring session, just went a little late. We're here with a full class in July. This is the only synagogue I know that does anything in the month of July. We keep going. So welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, Diana. Good morning to everybody here who's on Zoom. Welcome to Arlene and Ron and Karen and Michael and Stuart and Jeff coming from Stone Mountain and David. Sorry, Jeff, and Lou coming from Hilton Head. You guys lose for the farthest to David, who's coming from London, England, but you guys are a distant second. So actually, Lou, you're now third because David's in. David's in London and Jeff is in Stone Mountain.
Okay, I'll take it.
So welcome, hello to Diana, who's off camera, and anybody else who's off camera as well. And then everybody who's on YouTube, the millions of people we have on YouTube, most of them are in Madagascar and Mongolia. So we're really big in those two countries. And also in Mozambique, although they speak Portuguese, they have translators now that do that. So for the summer, I just thought we'd take individual sessions just for fun. Again, we'll always take suggestions. And then when August starts, we'll start getting more organized with some different thoughts and groupings. We've done a lot of the stuff in the modern era recently. We did some Jewish history of the modern era, famous Jews of the modern era, Jewish women of the modern era. So we've done a little bit of that, which was a lot of fun. But I was doing something for something else and thought another topic, which I'm thinking of a high holiday sermon for, but I haven't decided yet because I've done it before, is the Messiah. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Messiah today, if that's okay. I don't know if we have before, but I was speaking with a minister. He's a wonderful minister in Count, very supportive of Israel. And we started talking about the Messiah. We talked about a bunch of things. Most of the stuff we were pretty similar on what we believe, but the Messiah, again, the beliefs were very different in our messianic views because of the Christian and Jewish version of the Messiah is different. So what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about the history of the Messiah and then talk about how we look at it today, but maybe we'll start today. One of the ironies of the modern world is that we are in many ways following the traditions of the belief in the Messiah, but also we're bucking the traditions. What I mean. So the Messiah is a character, obviously, that goes pretty far back in time for us. And generally, belief in the Messiah is inversely related to how well Jews are doing in the world. So if Jews are doing terribly, if we're struggling with pogroms and affliction and persecution, belief in the Messiah increases. Why? Because you want somebody to save us. We want somebody to destroy our oppressors, and we don't feel like we can do it ourselves because we're not empowered. So the Messiah belief increases during periods of tumult and persecution, and it decreases when Jews are doing really well. The Golden Age of Spain, America, and the modern Jewish world, the Messiah, the talk about the Messiah has gone very low comparatively because we're empowered. We don't want somebody to save us, even though that's not what we believe in the Messiah. The irony, though, is, and I was reading an article about in the 1950s in the Jewish world, nobody talked about the Messiah. We're doing pretty well in America. Nobody talked about it. However, the talk of the Messiah has gone way up in the modern world, which is against the usual traditions, and the Orthodox community, especially the ultra-Orthodox. In the ultra-Orthodox community and the Chabad community, they talk about the Messiah all the time, which is unlike anything we've seen even in the ancient world, our previous generations. And it's bucking the trend because we're doing well in America. But in that world, they believe in some cases that the modern world is a problem, that it is hindering the Messiah from coming, that we need to put a fence around our community and keep everybody out so that the modern world doesn't influence us, and so the Messiah will come. And that is really strange that we see such a belief in the Messiah in the Jewish world more than we've had in hundreds of years in America. But in the ultra-Orthodox community and in the Chabad world, they talk about the Messiah all the time. If you go back to 1950, that was not the case. It was almost never talked about. Jeff, did you want to say something?
Actually, I was scratching, but since you got me, I forget whether it was in Israel or whether it was in New York. We were someplace in the Orthodox community. They were holding up signs that said Mashiach now.
Right. And that is, again, can mean a couple different things. Again, when you think of the Messiah, it can lead people to be radical. There was the group that was caught trying to blow up the temple and the Dome of the Rock, so that we could have the Messiah come. You get to the point where, you got to be, Jewish. So we'll talk about the meaning of it, but people who believe in the Messiah can be radical, not all of them. But it's in that world, the Messiah, the belief in the Messiah is also very different than what it is our world and what it traditionally is. So let's look at the history of the Messiah. And I think we're going to find some interesting things. First of all, at how little it is talked about in the ancient world, because it doesn't really exist in the way we know it until really after the biblical age is when the Messiah starts really coming to fruition as an idea in Judaism. So,
hey, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can we go just back to a very basic and say, what do we mean by the Messiah?
That's what we're going to talk about right now.
Okay.
Okay. So the Messiah today in the more traditional Orthodox world, maybe is somebody who will come and save us and create peace in the world. Traditionally, there's only a couple things that really the Messiah is, really traditionally believed by Jews. There's one that the Messiah will come from the line of King David. We're going to have control over Israel. Jews are all going to go to Israel. Some would say we get back to the Torah law and peace in the world. So that's one version of the Messiah. Some today might say Messiah is going to bring peace to the world. Others would say the Messiah comes and announces there's already peace in the world. That is the more empowered one, where we have to bring peace ourselves. Some would say the Elijah will come and foretell the coming of the Messiah. So the Messiah will either bring peace or there will be peace in the world, comes from the line of David. Jews will all go to Israel and will be in charge of the Holy Land. Some would say go back to Torah law, which is the sacrificial system of sacrificing animals at the temple, which is, I know, something that David is really excited about. So we'll talk about David because he's really excited about that. That was sarcasm.
I heard, you might get into this, but I thought I did, and you can correct me, was there some talk about it being a military leader?
That's exactly what we're going to talk about now. That's more of an original way. Yes, Stuart. And Stuart, you're on mute. Stuart, you're on mute. Sorry. If you can hear me, you're on mute. Stuart, if you can hear me, sorry for intruding, but you're on mute. So go where it says audio and click on audio.
I'll
Still
do it.
mute. So we'll come back to you when Karen comes and fixes it. So Karen's coming over to fix it. So let's go to the history. Okay, there goes Stuart.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I was on the wrong screen. It seems to me that with all the getting into the weeds, it comes down to two really polar opposite views of the Messiah, and I think that influences what we're talking about. One being where we are passive and oppressed, and the Messiah comes and takes us out of all that nonsense. Two is where we finally get our act together and behave as God wants us to behave. And the Messiah comes now to rule over a peaceful world, and the Messiah doesn't have to do anything except arrive. I think if you look at those two polar opposites, you get very different views about preparation. And I think a lot of places we're just in this mix, not knowing how to behave, because do we behave way A or way B?
And that's exactly what, again, that's the modern view. The modern view, again, depending on who you are, the Messiah will bring peace, or we shall bring peace, the Messiah will come. And it has a lot to do with how empowered we are.
How does that compare with the Christian Messiah? They say he's already come, and are we in a perfect world now?
Right. So that's why we'll go back in history. That's why one of the reasons we didn't believe in the Messiah of Jesus, the Messiah, because peace didn't come to the world. But even at the time of Jesus, the Messiah was still a very different concept. So what is the Messiah? Okay, so the Messiah for us is something different biblically than it is in what we know today. So if you look at the text, and we're talking about the Bible, obviously it's not mentioned in Torah because it comes from David. The idea of the Messiah was not the kind of Messiah we talk about, the ethereal being coming down, although it's a human who is going to bring peace to the world. Messiah means anointed one. Moshiach, and the anointed one was first Saul, King Saul, they're referring, and then King David, anointed as kings. So when we originally start seeing the idea of the Messiah in the book of 2 Samuel, the Messiah is David as the king of Judaism, king of Israel at the time, also called Judah, probably called Judah at the time. He is the king literally, not as a philosophical idea or as a angelic. He's basically the king. And when they say the Messiah's in the line of David, they talk about the line of David, meaning the line of David will continue to be kings. So the Messiah, or Mashiach, is the anointed one, and after every king, there will be another anointed one from the line of King David. So that's the original idea. It's basically the anointed one. King David is anointed, and his line will continue to be anointed. And that's what we see from Samuel. In the descendants are going to be, even Isaiah uses this in different ways we'll talk about. So now once the line of David is destroyed or ceases to exist after the destruction of the first temple, you have Isaiah speaking of anointed ones as well, the Messiah. But who does he refer to as the Messiah? One of the people that Isaiah refers to as the Messiah is Cyrus. Who is Cyrus? Cyrus is the king of Persia. After the Persians defeat the Babylonians, Cyrus says, you can go back to Israel and rebuild your temple. And so the word Messiah is used for Cyrus, not because he's bringing peace, but because he's allowing Jews to go back to the Holy Land and be in charge, although they will not be in charge. They will be in charge under the auspices of the Persian Empire. So pay your taxes, don't revolt. This is the idea of Messiah. It kind of goes in stages. The first stage is David is the Messiah. He's the anointed one by God to be king, and his family, his descendants will be the Messiahs, the anointed ones. And then now we're seeing after the decline of the house of David, Cyrus they're using the same word for Cyrus, meaning Jews will go back to Israel because of this person and have control over Israel. Even though Cyrus is not going to be king of Israel, though he literally is king of all of his empire. And so, but it's also used in another way slightly, because we read in Haggai and Zechariah about Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is the last known descendant of David. So this is how it works. The temple is destroyed in 586 BCE, and we lose track of any descendants of David. The kings have been killed. Some are taken into Babylonian exile. That's the end of the house of David, except for one exception. At the end of the 6th century, 510-ish, we are mentioned a guy named Zerubbabel, who is a descendant of David. And this Messiah character can be kind of referenced to Zerubbabel, who is the anointed one, who is the last house of David, who will start a new generation of the house of David. However, Zerubbabel disappears, probably killed by Persia, when they understand that people are thinking, well, maybe they'll have another house of David. We need to get rid of this guy. So Zerubbabel disappears. So then again, the idea of the house of David is the idea that one day the house of David will rule again in Israel. So it's not the idea that there's going to be a being that comes and creates peace for all the world. It is that the Davidic dynasty will restart. And in no small circles, as Genevieve said, it had to do also with a military prowess. We're going to have the line of David who are going to be militarily strong enough to take back Israel. And that is more part of it than probably the peace on earth part, which is not brought into it at all. So we do see prophecies about David and Isaiah. But even Isaiah, when we see this idea of the messianic person, it is going to be somebody who cares about justice, who's going to be on the throne of Israel. And obviously they mean descendants of David are going to be on the throne of Israel, and there's going to be justice in Israel where Jews live. And that's kind of the biblical version of Messiah. It is not really talked about very often. The Messiah is almost never mentioned, and as we know it, it is never really mentioned in the Bible. It is almost always a reference to David, or except for a little bit with Cyrus and a few others. So basically, it is anybody, it is the Davidic dynasty or somebody who helps us have control of Israel, like Cyrus. Again, later on, that same Messiah notation will be given to Napoleon, because Napoleon is talking about giving freedom to Jews and empowering Jews. So some believe he was the Messiah, or he was the Messiah at the time. So the Messiah originally is not what we know it today. It's about the kingdom of David, a military throne, justice for all people, and that is but if you read backwards and you go to Isaiah and you read isolated passages, you can take the Messiah to be a lot of different things. But if you read it as a whole, he's generally referencing King David will come back, or his dynasty will come back. So that's the Messiah in the Bible. That is the Samuel, the Zechariah, Samuel, that's Zechariah and Haggai. That's the Psalms probably reference to Samuel, even the Ezekiel reference to Samuel. I mean, to the Messiah is all referencing King David and the Davidic dynasty again. So this is important because this is kind of the preliminary stage of this idea of the Messiah, which is probably not as popular as it's going to be in the later stages. Because after the Bible is finished, the books, we're going to get a different kind of messianic viewpoint, really starting in the Roman era. This is going to be one of them is going to be the Jesus Messiah idea. And this is this eschatological personality. Did I say that right?
Sounded good.
All right, close enough. That bringing peace to the world is, anybody see The Life of Brian? Monty Python's The Life of Brian?
Yes.
So there's a part where they're walking down the aisle and they see the Messiah, they see a Jesus preaching about he's the Messiah. But they walk further and there's another guy preaching about he's the Messiah. And they go further, there's another guy preaching about he's the Messiah, because it's a messianic belief that really starts to bloom around 2,000 years ago. And it has a lot to do with the Roman Empire, that the Messiah is going to come and overthrow the Roman Empire and bring peace and justice to the world. For the Jewish perspective, it is David. Why? Because it's a military Messiah who's going to come and throw off the yoke of Roman oppression. But there are other beliefs in the Messiah that is more heavenly version, that this Messiah is going to save us. And we see it in books that are in the Apocrypha, like the book of Ben Sira, that are in the book of Tobit and in other areas in Revelations, that they take passages from the Old Testament and they bring it into this idea of this Messiah that is going to be powerful, beyond, not human, coming back from heaven, almost more than angelic, and saving the world. This becomes Jesus for Christians, but there were other viewpoints as well. And this idea of a Messiah that is taken by Christianity also has some roots in Judaism. But again, it's a kind of different Messiah. The first major messianic character we're going to see for us, is going to be in the 2nd century CE. We're going to see Bar Kokhba, who was a revolutionary in Israel. He is fighting the Romans, and the greatest sage of the day, Rabbi Akiva, names him as the Messiah. That this figure that is going to defeat the Romans and bring back the Messianic dynasty, the Davidic dynasty, to Israel. And of course, if you don't know the story, he loses. The Romans win. You may not realize that, but the Romans win. They win a lot until the 5th century. They win almost all the time. So they win, and the Messiah, this character, is killed. And so that, though, will begin the idea that there will be messianic characters who will come out through the ages that are going to bring Judaism peace, bring us back to Israel. It has a lot to do with the destruction of the Second Temple, when we're no longer allowed into Jerusalem. And we're going to see that our vision of the Messiah goes a different path than Christianity, although there's some similarities. And ironically, there are more similarities to the ultra-Orthodox Messiah and the Christian Messiah than there were originally. I mean, their Messiah has a lot of similarities to Jesus and the ultra-Orthodox and Chabad world, which is ironic because the Messiah and the Christian world originally is very different. The Jewish one is warrior, Davidic dynasty, bring Jews to Israel. But for the Christians, it became that and more. It is going to be the Son of God who is going to return and who is not going to be human, but even more than a human, where our Messiah is always going to be a human who's from the line of David. So there's going to be messianic characters throughout the ages. The most famous, of course, is going to be, who's the most famous messianic character in Jewish history?
Shabbatai Tzvi.
Shabbatai Tzvi would be one. Some would say he's number one. Some would say Bar Kokhba's number one. But I think there's a new number one, and he is modern, and that is?
Schneerson.
Yeah, Schneerson, the Rebbe. The Rebbe, who is is the Chabad rabbi who died in I think the 90s. For them, he is the Messiah. He is their Messiah, literally, who came to bring the world to perfection and is still working on it. So that is what is much stranger about this Messiah, not stranger, different. They may be right, but the Bar Kokhba Messiah and the Shabbatai Tzvi Messiah, which we'll talk about a little bit, come at periods where life is very difficult for the Jewish world. Persecution during the Roman period is getting worse. Shabbatai Tzvi comes after the Chmielnicki pogroms in Europe, some of the worst periods for Jews, when this Ukrainian this Ukrainian, I don't know if he was a duke or he's an elite man in Ukraine, rises up against the Jews especially, but against everybody, and starts killing Jews. The Jews are there representing the Polish aristocracy, but they're the ones who blame for everything. This is when Shabbatai Tzvi comes. It's a character who rises during a very depressing time for Jews, whereas the Rebbe today, the Messiah today in the Chabad world, is in modern America in the 1990s, which may have been one of the best times, if not the best time for Jews in the world. And that's when Schneerson, so it's even more remarkable that he became a messianic figure because he came during a time of enlightenment for the world. For Jews especially, there'd been almost no persecution for many years for Jews in the 1990s. Israel is very strong. There's peace accord possibilities. And this is where he dies and becomes the Messiah. And that's really quite an interesting change. So now, as for the Messiah for us, it is a very interesting change because, as I mentioned, generally, if times are good, belief in the Messiah goes down. Why? Because we're empowered. And nowhere is that more apparent than in America, in the non-Chabad ultra-Orthodox world, where the Messiah has had very little influence on us. In the Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist, agnostic, renewal Jewish worlds, we don't talk about the Messiah very much at all because we are empowered. And when we do talk about the Messiah, it is the idea that the Messiah will come after we've already fixed the world ourselves. The Messiah is not bringing peace. The Messiah is coming to say, congratulations, you did it. Hooray. And there are those who don't even believe in the Messiah, which is a very high percentage in the Jewish world. They may think of a messianic age where we're going to do this ourselves and bring peace to the world, and that there's not an individual who's a descendant of David who's going to rise up. So this is where the Messiah is today for us. Now, any questions or thoughts before we continue? Sorry, I think I've manipulated. Stuart.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a correlation, it hits me, between the view of the king or emperor over time and the view of the Messiah. It was easy in the time of Cyrus, who was, quote, a good king or a good emperor, friendly one, to think of the Messiah as the king, because the king was now ensuring the peace, so to speak. Similarly, perhaps later, even in modern times, when there was no bad king around, having just come out of one. So in the time of the really bad times, when there are bad kings, then we need a savior Messiah. But in the time of benevolent kings, so to speak, we don't need a Messiah to come help us, because we already, in a sense, have one in the king. And I think there's a correlation between the view of the king and the actions of the kings and the view of the Messiah.
And it is, I think the Messiah really stems from a king, we want a king that is good and treats the people well. And that is what David did. Even when he was considered a man of the people. And that's the kind of king we want. We want somebody who is going to treat, we're not talking about equality. That I was watching a movie called King Arthur, which is a great movie. It got terrible reviews, but I like it. And it's about how Arthur is actually a Roman who is in England at the time the Romans are leaving, and decides to stay and protect the Brits against the Saxons. And he talks about people are equal, and he's this really guy talks about how, but again, equality was not talked about like that. So it has nothing to do with equality. It has to be it's about treating people with respect and dignity, that human beings all are human in the face of God. We all have rules and this is definitely, but as time has gone on in the Jewish world, we have taken the messianic viewpoint and changed it in some ways to similar to Christianity in some ways. And that is, today's view of the Messiah is not somebody from the house of David who's going to bring the kingship to Israel and all Jews are going to live there. The viewpoint is that the Messiah is going to bring peace to the world and maybe connect the next world and our world together. So that we'll be with our ancestors who have died, and we'll all be mingling together under perfect harmony, which is never really a part of the biblical viewpoint of the Messiah. And it's a much later viewpoint. But as I said, in the last 75 years, the viewpoint of the Messiah has gone up and has changed quite a bit. A lot of it, and nobody will probably say this in certain parts of Judaism, but we're taking some viewpoints maybe from Christianity and mixing it in with us a little bit. But nobody will ever admit that, because obviously Mashiach, Messiah, is mentioned in the Old Testament or our Bible, even though it's a very different Messiah, as we mentioned. So today, that is the viewpoint for a lot of people for the Jewish world. The Messiah is an ethereal presence that's going to combine the next world and this world. And that was a very big issue for some in the early part of the 20th century in the Orthodox world, because you had modern Zionism, which is socialist in its basis and probably, if not atheist, agnostic in its belief system. So you have Orthodox Jews really rallying against Zionism until you have figures like Rav Kook, who's the most famous, Rav Kook, who comes and says, Zionism is the preliminary stage to bringing the Messiah. So that's how some of the Orthodox, especially the modern Orthodox, support Israel. It's the preliminary point before the Messiah will come. And what's going to happen when the Messiah comes? All Jews will go to Israel. We all believe in Torah law. The temple will be rebuilt, which is a very big problem right now for obvious reasons, because somebody's there, living there right now. And the next world and this world are going to be together. And for those who are a little bit harsher, the enemies are going to be crushed as well. And for those of you who are Reformed Jews, and that happens, we better be very careful, because some of those people consider Reformed Jews the enemy, more so than Muslims or Christians or anybody else. So, so David and Genevieve.
Well, I was just going to say, sorry. Isn't it the case that if the Messiah doesn't come by the year 6000, Jewish year 6000, the Messiah won't come?
That, again, there are different views. That is one, that is not everybody's view. That is, some believe it's going to come, but there are a few people who've given numbers to it. And every few years they have numbers of different Messiah or this, but yeah, that's one of the views. But most, I think, believe it's coming no matter what. They believe it's going to come before then. We still got, plenty of time.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah. What do we got? 115 years, you said?
215, I think.
215 years. No, 215 years. So, but you know what? I can wait. I'll wait for it.
Well, three things, real quick. So I always struggled being raised Christian with the idea of Jesus until I saw him as like a revolutionary and a rabbi, as a Jew, and possibly a Kabbalist. And then I was like, oh, that makes sense. If there's like corruption and stuff like that, then I could see him like that as like a possible real person. Also, part of being a leader is like Moses, right? He was designated to lead the people forward, lead the people out. So it is taking care of them, but it's also leading them to something else. And then like whatever God wants them, where God wants them to go. And then the third thing is, where did the concept come from that the Messiah was going to be born on the 9th of Av?
Well, okay, that's a lot of questions. So let's first talk about the first part. I think a lot of that is to do with biblically the Messiah. Again, it has to do with a leader who is, for better or worse, a good human being who is going to follow laws and adheres to the laws. And that is the original idea of Messiah. It's going to come from the line of David. All has to do with the line of David, because he was this wonderful king. And so that all has to do with it. That is probably more biblical than later. That is the idea that Messiah is going to be king who is righteous and a good human being who's going to treat us well and that kind of stuff. So that is still considered the Messiah to this day. I mean, nobody thinks the Messiah is going to be a bad person. I mean, so as for Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av, so 9th of Av is famous for, it is the day where everything bad happened in Judaism. Terrible things happened in the Bar Kokhba revolution. Both temples destroyed on the 9th of Av. And so some believe that that will be the date of the birth of the Messiah or the day he will come. that will reverse this horrible holiday, the 9th of Av, which is the day everything bad happened, and will reverse it and make it the day that the Messiah comes or the Messiah is born. And that's the day that some think revolution will happen in the Jewish world. So, but again,
But it's not noted anywhere. They just came up with it.
It's not, remember, Tisha B'Av, the holiday is not biblical. That's a post-biblical holiday.
Oh.
So it is noted, and I mean, it's mentioned in many different places, but it's not biblical. Again, the Messiah is not really biblical in the way we know it. The Messiah biblically is King David's house is going to come back, and Jews will be in power in Israel, and we will be in control. The idea of a good king who's going to treat us well is also part of it. Later, it's going to come as the next idea of Messiah is a messianic character who's going to come and defeat a vicious enemy who controls Israel, and we will rebuild the temple and start the whole system again. And then eventually becomes this ethereal being that's going to bring peace to the world, and that is going to combine the next world and this world, or it's going to be a messianic age where peace will come to the world through us. So there's stages to the Messiah. A lot of Jews today do not believe in the Messiah. Obviously, we've been waiting a long time. So if you go by the end of the House of David, we've been waiting for, almost 2,800 years. Now, almost 2,700 years. More like 2,600 years. I better do my math better. 2,600 years. It's about that. So we've been waiting 2,600 years for the Messiah. We've had a couple times where they thought he might be here. The only time in the Bible we see really references is Cyrus or Zerubbabel. But post-biblical, we see obviously, we see lots of messianic characters through the ages. There's lots of them. They're all over the place. Anybody can say I'm the Messiah. But whether you get a following and whether things happen, doesn't happen as often. The biggest one sense would be Bar Kokhba, Shabtai Zvi, Napoleon, and probably Schneerson, Rabbi Schneerson today. So I personally believe that, I'm empowered. So if the Messiah is going to come, we got to do it. We got to really work hard. That if we want peace on earth, then we've got to really, make it ourselves. But there are those Jews who believe in the Messiah. But again, a lot of this messianic belief starts later. And again, Maimonides talks about it. He helps brings it into the fold from his perspective. Maimonides is kind of the first person that brings the idea, I believe in Messiah type idea, which will be a theme for the next 1,000 years. Even songs, Anima Amin, I believe in the coming of Messiah. Moshiach, Moshiach, Moshiach. Anybody hear that song? So any thoughts or questions about the Messiah? Jeff?
One sort of final one.
Stuart, yeah.
I wonder if we are at a time when we might be adding Netanyahu to that list as a warrior Messiah.
I mentioned that, yes.
Who knows what's going to happen?
I should bite my tongue for saying that, but
what generally happens, I think, is, some people are called Messiah while they're living and others after they die. So it's going to be hard to know what somebody does until years later when you look back. So is Netanyahu the Messiah? Again, is he looked at by some? Maybe.
Is he even religious? Is that?
No, again, there's nothing in it that says you have to be religious. Again, that's what's assumed. Now, some people think so, but others think you will provide religiosity for others. That's kind of like Rob Cook said. But yes, he is not religious at all, but he is very supportive of the Orthodox in Israel. So that might be why. Again, some look at Messiah still as more of a military figure. And certainly he's looked at as a military figure, even though he's a prime minister. So, but what we're going to talk about next week is I think we're going to talk about an update of what's going on in Israel and see the positive and the negatives of what's going on. Of course, it could change anytime, but again, we don't know what's going to happen. So, but it looks like there's a relative calm comparatively right now, but we'll see what happens. We see the rhetoric from Iran has ramped up again, so who knows? And again, we don't know what's going to happen with our president, and everything is connected. The Ukraine war is very connected to what's going on in the Middle East. And China's viewpoints they're all connected, so you have to really look at it from a macro perspective. I am not an expert, but there's nothing that's not connected.
So are you planning to do your notes from next week, Tuesday night or Wednesday morning?
I'm doing them at 10:29.
Sounds right.
Yes. I'm going to look to see what's going on to the moment. But yeah, so what we'll see, we'll talk about next week is the positives and the negatives of what's gone on in the Middle East in recent days. There's a lot of positives. We don't hear any of them in America, but there are a lot of positives. And we'll talk about the negatives, which are pretty impressive, unfortunately, as well. Yeah. So excellent, guys. So before we conclude, Saturday morning obviously is, and this is no joke, our 292nd anniversary service, as our congregation was founded on July 11th, this Friday, 1733. So that'll be this Saturday. Should be fun. We're going to have a couple of speakers. We'll talk a little bit about the 51st anniversary of the museum, because why would you, and the 249th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, because why wait till 250 or 50? We don't want these. And then afterwards, we also have, of course, Seersucker Shabbat coming up the first Saturday in August. If you want a really amazingly, interestingly, once-in-a-lifetime event, there is a funeral next Friday, the 18th, at 10 a.m. at Bonaventure for Milton Himes. Why am I mentioning a funeral? Milton Himes died in World War II as a member of the Mighty Eighth, and they recently found the planes on accident. I think some divers just accidentally came upon the plane, and through DNA, they found Milton Himes, who was a member of our congregation, and they're going to bury him. And he had no kids, obviously he died very young, but his nephew and niece will be there, and some other family members who are actually members of our congregation. And then later that day, there will be a talk at the Mighty Eighth in connection with it. So that's open to the community. Again, how often do you get to go to a funeral of somebody who died in World War II? I've never been to one. I'll probably never be to another. And on my block, just in case you're wondering, Miriam Center, who is a member of our congregation, lives on our block. She is 99, and she dated Milton Himes.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure she's going to speak. I don't think she's been invited to speak, but she will, if all goes well, be coming to the funeral. So
Wow.
So who knows what would have happened if he had survived. I don't know if they dated that,
Seriously?
but
Seriously?
she definitely went on dates with him. So I thought that was pretty interesting and rare. So those are the three events I wanted to mention coming up. They're all during the day, so easy to get here. No pressure for anybody, but they will all be very interesting. So hopefully we'll see you this Saturday, and next Wednesday, again, we'll talk about the situation in Israel today. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
And let me
Thank
say
you,
thanks to
Rabbi.
everybody again. So thank you
Thank
for those
you.
who came on Zoom. Hi to Arlene and Ron and Karen and Jeff and Stuart and Michael and David and Lou and Genevieve and Diana, and we had a couple others who were not on, and Gilbert. Thank you for all joining us, and thank you to everybody who was watching online, and we will see you next week.
Nice session.
Next
Welcome,
week.
everybody.
Thank you. Really was interesting. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Rabbi, a quick question. So
Yes.
you said the funeral will be next Thursday,
Well,
Friday,
everybody-
correct?
A week from Friday, this Friday, 10 a.m. at Bonaventure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's open to the community.
Thank you.